Hello, I'm Gail Ouellette. I'm President and Scientific Director of the Regroupement Québécois des Maladies Orphelines, which we call the Quebec Coalition of Orphan Diseases here in Quebec. And we are hosting our Education Day today on February 26th during our month of February. And now we have this presentation. We're very honored to have representatives of SWAN UK, Syndromes Without a Name UK. We have Isabel Rundle, who is the Engagement and Support Manager at Genetic Alliance UK, because actually SWAN UK is a project, a part of Genetic Alliance UK, which is an umbrella group as we are in Quebec. And we also are honored to have Claudia Beard, who is a mother of a child who is undiagnosed and will tell us her story. So Isabel, you can present SWAN to us so that here in Quebec we know the marvelous work that you're doing.
Great, I will do. Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting us along today. So, as Gail said, I'm here to talk to you about SWAN UK, which is a support network for families of children and young people in the UK who have a syndrome without a name, which is also known as an undiagnosed genetic condition. So, just to briefly explain in a little bit more detail the kind of structure and the setup of Genetic Alliance UK and where SWAN UK sits into that. So as Gail already mentioned, Genetic Alliance UK is an umbrella organisation of over 200 patient organisations who support people and families who have rare or undiagnosed condition. Some of those conditions are some of those organisations are really big organisations, such as the British Heart Foundation, who support hundreds of thousands of different families. And then some of those organisations are tiny and support people who are affected by a condition that's so rare there may only be 1 or 2 people in the UK who are affected by the condition. Genetic Alliance UK runs SWAN UK, which I won't go into too much detail about right now because I'm going to talk a lot more about SWAN UK. And then they also run Rare Disease UK, which is the UK campaign to advocate and support people who are affected by rare conditions. So, what is a syndrome without a name? So a syndrome without a name or undiagnosed genetic condition is not a diagnosis, but it's a term that's used to describe when a person has a condition which is likely to be genetic in its cause, but genetic testing hasn't identified what that condition is. It's thought that around 6,000 children are born every year in the UK with a syndrome without a name. But we think that it's probably likely that the numbers are actually higher than that. And whilst some people will eventually go on to receive a diagnosis, some people who have an undiagnosed genetic condition, that condition is going to remain undiagnosed for their life. So there are lots of different ways that an undiagnosed genetic condition can present itself. By nature, obviously, as I said, this isn't a diagnosis, so this isn't referring to a particular condition, but a huge range of different conditions. They can range from mild to moderate learning difficulties to extremely complex medical needs, disabilities. Sometimes the conditions can be life-limiting as well. And as you can see, so the list of symptoms that are on the screen right now, so respiratory problems, neurological problems are all quite common symptoms in an individual with an undiagnosed genetic condition. There are 3 main reasons why these conditions are so hard to diagnose. So the first one is that the condition is so rare that the geneticists who are doing the genetic testing don't even know that the condition exists. And obviously you can't test for something if you don't know that it exists. It could also be that it's an unusual presentation of a known condition. So it could be that, for instance, we know families where a girl has an undiagnosed genetic condition and eventually she receives a diagnosis, but that condition has only ever been seen before in boys. So because her presentation of the condition was completely different to all of the known clinical presentation kind of triggers, then that would have never triggered for testing for that particular condition. And it could also be that the child and their family go through genetic testing, but the genetic changes that are found are variants of unknown significance. So that basically means that the genetic changes are found, but it's unknown whether those changes are what's causing the condition. And an example of that could be that the change that's found in the child's genome is also found in one of the parents' genomes, and while the child's presenting that condition, the parent isn't. So having a child with an undiagnosed genetic condition can have a massive impact on families. Obviously, having a child with additional needs can have a huge impact on families anyway. But when you add the additional complications of being undiagnosed onto that, that impact is really exacerbated. Parental guilt's a big thing that lots of the families we work with kind of report feeling. So because the cause behind the condition hasn't been identified, mums especially start to blame themselves and think it was something that they've done, particularly during their pregnancy, which could have caused the condition in their child. Reproductive choice also becomes really complicated and really difficult for parents because they can't make informed decisions about having another child because the genetic cause of their child's condition isn't known. So obviously, medical professionals can't kind of calculate how likely that condition is to occur in any other children that they may have. And if you already have one child that has really complex needs, it's a massive thing to then decide if you're going to have another child when you don't know the likelihood that your other child will also have the same needs. Without a diagnosis, there's no prognosis. So people don't know how their children's condition are going to develop. They don't know if their children will regress. They don't know if the progress they'll make will suddenly stop. And unfortunately, parents just don't know how long their children are going to live for. They don't know if their child's condition is going to be life-limiting or not. They don't know how long they might have with their child. In terms of treatments and therapies, if you don't know what condition a person has, you don't know what the kind of optimum treatment is going to be to give them the best quality of life that they could have. In the UK at the moment, especially with the effects of the pandemic, access to services is really, really stretched. And often you need a diagnosis to be able to kind of tick that box to qualify to access the services. If you don't have a diagnosis, it can be really, really tricky to access those services that you need. We know of a family whose child had to be resuscitated 3 times within 2 months, and they still had to basically beg to get a hospice space because they just didn't have that diagnosis. So they couldn't tick the box necessary on the paperwork that they had to fill in to access the respite. Parents often say that they're not taken seriously by medical professionals because, even people who kind of work within healthcare can find it really hard to get their head around the concept that a child can still have needs, even though they aren't diagnosed. And parents can get called dramatic. Mums especially can just told, they're being a hysterical mum, especially if it's a first-time mother. Isolation's a massive thing because parents feel like they're going through this on their own. They feel like no one understands what they're going through. Same for siblings as well. It can be really hard for siblings having a brother or sister with special needs anyway, with disabilities anyway. But then when you can't explain to your friends what's wrong with your sibling, that can be really difficult. And all of these kind of accumulate and have a massive impact on mental health. So this is where we come in. So at SWAN UK, the main way we try and help is by putting families in contact with each other. So we put families who have children with undiagnosed genetic conditions in touch so they can kind of meet each other, have fun. We run online peer support groups through private Facebook groups, and they're kind of informal information forums where parents can ask each other questions, they can talk to each other, they can share advice. We've had parents who've been rushed into hospital with their children at 2 a.m. and they've posted in the group, and someone's been awake and been able to talk to them and kind of reassure them a bit, and they could just have a chat, and that's a massive, massive help to people. We run information events, so we educate people about undiagnosed genetic conditions. We run family events to zoos or theme parks, so all the families can come along, siblings as well, they can get to meet each other, parents can get to meet each other, and they're really good ways of parents who are in the same local areas getting to meet each other and kind of start to build up a bit of a friendship. And then that's really important going on. They can work on that, and that becomes a really strong peer support network. We also raise awareness among professionals. So we go along to meetings at child development centres. We give talks to health visitors, to paediatricians, genetic counsellors, let them know all about SWAN UK and the work we do so they can kind of signpost families to us. Genetic Alliance UK do lots of work in UK healthcare policy, and we always make sure that the undiagnosed voice is represented in those policy work that we do. We publish information about undiagnosed genetic conditions, run our online peer support forums, and we also have parent reps who run local networks around the country, one of which, Claudia, you'll get to meet very shortly when I finish doing this presentation. So these are just some nice quotes from some members that kind of show how much SWAN UK can actually help. So before SWAN UK, we never really belonged anywhere. I'd assumed a diagnosis was available for every child, but now I know better. However, what I found in SWAN UK was an amazing community who totally understood how difficult life could be without one. And then the other quote, SWAN UK has helped us feel we belong somewhere, that we aren't alone, that there are other families who simply understand what it's like living with the unknown. So thank you for listening. There's our website if you want to find out a bit more about the work that we do, and also our email address. So feel free to drop me an email if you have any questions. And I'm going to hand over to one of our parent reps, Claudia, who's going to talk to you about her experiences having a child with an undiagnosed genetic condition.
Your microphone.
We'll try that again. Hi there. I'm Claudia, and as Izzy said, I am a parent of a child that is currently undiagnosed, and also parent representative for SWAN UK. Give you a bit of backstory. I am a mother of three. I've got three boys. I've got a 15-year-old boy who is a beautifully typical teenage boy. His name's Broden, and he's 15. I've got Chase, who is 9. And he is a fantastically dramatic, hilarious, stubborn little boy. And then I've got Trent. So Trent is 8 years old, and he's my swan. He's our special little one. What we do know about Trent is he's nonverbal. He has global developmental delay. He is hypersensitive when it comes to food, so he can't tolerate food, so he's peg-fed. He has a hiatus hernia, which causes a major reflux, which can make him sick quite a lot. He is autistic and he's epileptic, which developed in 2019. But that's all we basically know about Trent. We know that his genetic condition is unknown and he's our swan. If I give you a little bit of a backstory, excuse me, I had a very normal pregnancy, very standard birth. He has been surprising us since I was pregnant, because we were told he was a she. So we had to get ready for a she, which took me a while because I had 2 boys. But out popped this little boy, Trent, and everything was as normal as it could be. His APGAR score was perfect. Nothing prepared us for what was to come. We went home and what started was screaming. We had loads and hours of screaming. Nothing we could do would calm him down. Nothing we could do would comfort him. And he would scream for hours until he literally passed out from exhaustion. We spent a lot of time at our local pediatric ward in our hospital, just trying to find out what was happening to this little boy. And what Izzy said came into play quite a bit, being told babies cry, oh, it could be colic. He was my 3rd boy, so I had the confidence to be able to go, no, this is not right. And my other son was only 15 months different, so I had a baby quite soon. So I wasn't brushed aside, and I'm glad I wasn't brushed aside, because that started us on the path of trying to find out an explanation for our son. We noticed he wasn't hitting certain milestones. So he didn't do the whole baby uncurling thing. He wasn't playing with toys. He wasn't trying to roll. So we actually had a diagnosis of cerebral palsy. But then this was discarded because he started uncurling. He started reaching for toys. But there were lots of other milestones that were missed. So Trent didn't sit until he was 10 months old. He didn't walk until he was 3.5. And he still can't really walk very well. And he's 8 years old, forgive me. We then had another diagnosis of periventricular leukomalacia, which is damage in the white matter part of the brain. And this was after an MRI scan. Again, this diagnosis was discarded because from a future MRI scan, it came out that there wasn't any damage. So it's quite a roller coaster when you are trying to find a diagnosis. Forgive me. Then we were referred to the 100,000 Genome Project, which to us was a saving grace because we had been through so many different tests and were told by so many different people that there was nothing else they could do. We went in 2015, and it took 2 years to get a response from the project, and unfortunately nothing was found. They weren't able to determine his genetic condition, which was very, very hard to get our head around when you know how amazing science and the medical field is, that they couldn't tell me what was wrong with my son. I can tell you what it's like living with a child without a diagnosis is so much waiting. You're waiting for many tests, waiting for many appointments, waiting for many results. And the catch-22 that comes with that when you get the result and they haven't found anything, and there's a slight sigh of relief, but equally frustration because there's no answers. The pure fear you get as a parent because you don't know what the future holds and who's going to look after him if and when I can't. It's one of those, that's a really big thing. And also, as he said again, the guilt as a mother. Did I do this to my son? Did I eat something wrong? Did I not sleep on the right side of the bed? The thoughts that go through your head as a parent. We rely so heavily on our doctors and nurses to point us in the right direction. And I've been quite lucky that I've had some fantastic medical staff around Trent. But there are a few parents that don't have that. So it's that constant having to be the advocate and the fighting and the admin and the keeping on top of many different specialities and learning about all these these different specialities. It's very difficult for Trent's brothers. Broden, who's the oldest, knew straight away that there wasn't something quite right with his youngest. Chase, who, as I said, was only 15 months different, didn't realize for a very long time. He used to just tell his friends that his baby brother's brain was broken, because that was his understanding of having a disabled brother. We have many forms as a parent to write out, and all these forms about what your child cannot do, which is really hard, and it literally takes your breath away when you're writing 40 pages of things your child can't do, so you can get some help to be able to look after that child. But we've also learned some amazing things having a child like Trent, and the things I've got to do because of having a child like Trent. But we've learned of unconditional love. This boy is amazing. What this boy does for us, it has brought our family together. When he gives you eye contact, it's just that much more special, because it's not something he does all the time. When he wants affection, he seeks it out, and he'll come and lean his forehead against you and giggle when you pepper him with kisses, and all those sort of things we've learned to appreciate, where it's the sunlight in the storm, basically. I discovered SWAN UK in 2017, and I discovered it by chance. I wasn't given any literature from the doctors. I wasn't told about this organization. But when I found SWAN UK, it was I could take a breath, because I could talk to people who truly understood. You could talk to people and say how hard it is, and they actually understand. And as you said, you can reach out at any time of the day or night, and there will be someone there to go, yep, I'm there, I've got you, let's talk, what do you need? There's pure empathy, there's understanding, there's trust. And I became a parent representative because I am quite far down the looking for a diagnosis journey. And there are a lot of families that are starting that journey, and it's terrifying. And I know how terrifying that is. And that's why myself and all the other parent representatives became a representative, because we want to help these families get through this journey. But also we get the opportunity to talk to a lot of medical teams to remind them of the children and the families behind all these appointments and these blood tests and these MRI scans, and remind them that the amazing work that they're doing, which we appreciate, is actually a little person. And just to show them our appreciation for that. SWAN UK is a phenomenal organization, and I'm grateful to them, and I'm actually so happy to be working with them. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Claudia, for that personal story, and Isabel, for the work you're doing to support parents like Claudia. Before we end our session, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions. For Isabel first, well, either if you know the answer. So in Genetic Alliance, there's also Rare Disease UK. So I've been following you for some years. And so here, I think you've advanced now with a rare disease plan or something in the UK. We, in Canada, still don't have anything like that.
Wow.
It's really a shame. In Quebec, we're advancing in our province, so we were advocates with other patient organizations. We're supposed to get a policy or something this year. So, but do you think that in the last years with rare disease, what you've been advocating for and what your government has been doing, their part, do you think it's advancing to reduce the delays in diagnosis and supporting families like Claudia's?
So I think that's quite a complex question for a few reasons. But firstly, obviously, as with every other country in the world right now, COVID has just taken precedent over everything. So I don't think that we're in the same position that we would be in terms of the UK strategy for rare diseases if COVID hasn't happened. I think things would be much more advanced. We are now, so the NHS is now rolling out whole genome sequencing, which will hopefully improve diagnostic rates. And then also, so Claudia mentioned the 100,000 Genomes project, which has now finished, but lots of people are only now receiving diagnoses from the 100,000 Genomes project. So in the SWAN UK community, we're noticing that lots of people are getting diagnoses through, but those diagnoses are in the main extremely rare conditions. So people will be getting a diagnosis, but they'll get a diagnosis which is essentially a list of letters and numbers, referring to the chromosomes and the genes on those chromosomes which have the changes on, and families is essentially left in the same position they were before they received the diagnosis. So I think that in a couple of years' time, then I do think things will be a lot better than they are now, because I think that the strategy is very good and I think that it will do great things, but I just think that we're in a global pandemic. So, obviously NHS resources and everything is kind of directed towards COVID, but
yeah.
I mean, like, it's definitely going to happen, and we can already see, like Claudia will agree with me that, we see every day in the Facebook groups that we were talking about for SWAN UK, probably I would say on some days there's over 5 people who have received a diagnosis. So and you can see kind of flurries of when, people have been told it would be like lots of people receive their results at the same time and then quiet for a bit. And then, so I do think that, so yes, but not as much as they could be, but they will be, is my answer to that.
Yeah.
Yes, and Claudia, one last question. Yes, the pandemic, it's everywhere, and unfortunately, rare diseases are not necessarily the priorities in many countries like ours, and so they're taking a backseat again, which is too bad, but genetics is advancing. So yeah. Claudia, we have an information center, and in the last years now, people call us up for information about a disease, but the name is a gene, exactly what Isabel was saying. So I have this disease, but it's an acronym for the gene. And so Anne Isabel said, well, it doesn't change necessarily anything because it's so rare, ultra rare, even new diseases. So what if you were receiving such a name of a gene associated with your son's disease, would it still be a relief? Will it still give you hope? Because then it's a syndrome with a name, but how would you think you'd react?
It's a hard one. I've had the opportunity to speak to families that have older children in their 18s, 90s, and their 20s who have recently received diagnosis, and it hasn't actually been a help for them so far down the line because nothing's been able to be changed for them. For me, it is a hard one. We're so far, again, also down the line of trying to find a diagnosis, and we're pretty sure about Trent that it wouldn't really change a lot about him in terms that we know that he's not there's nothing life limiting. He's not regressing. So in actual fact, the diagnosis might not necessarily change anything. It might just give it a name, but it's the question of, would this affect his brothers if they were to have children much later on in life? Or maybe there is something that we could be doing to change it. I think the difficult part comes in when they come with the said acronym or a name to whatever's changed in the genetic code, but no explanation. I think that's the difficult part for families, because you have that slight relief that, oh, maybe they can tell me a bit more about my son or daughter, but they can't actually because science hasn't been able to explain that. So I think it is a bit of a catch-22 situation.
Yes, and to just to end what we've been during our month of February having webinars on projects with exome sequencing, and there is some hope sometimes, maybe more for young children, infants. Sometimes it could impact on treatment when they find such a gene, a mutation in such a gene. And sometimes they find what they call de novo variants, which are new mutations, which means that there's much less impact. For example, your other two sons would have to worry less about, having a child with the same undiagnosed disorder. So that's some positive things, but I think it's obviously a minority of the families who receive that kind of news. Well, thank you very much for your personal story, Claudia, and Isabel for presenting SWAN to us, which is a great organization to support undiagnosed families. And we're going to try to do something similar here. We'll maybe ask you for some counseling about that. So thank you very much, and have a nice day.
Thank you.